Hey, CD, what are you doing? I'm watching a video of a mouse trying to get a cracker into his mouse hole. Why? I don't know, I admire the perseverance in the face of What did you want? I was wondering how you felt about polyrap. Why? Well, you're poly. So? Okay, so there's one problem when trying to discuss polyamory. Namely, nobody fucking writes it. There are very few films, shows, books, or games that ever cover polyamory. So trying to have preferences or thoughts on something rarer than my sister with a consenting partner is difficult to say the least. While the world of romance and RPGs has polyamory on and off, and there's an ocean of visual novel dating sims that involve multiple partners, I've always discounted them because it's always been player sexual in nature. Not saying no to the player about getting to fuck all their favorite waifus. I'm sure some people would disagree with me on this, but I don't consider this the same thing as having a satisfying story. I mean, by that logic, harem anime as a concept is polyamorous or suited to it, and it very much is not. But the lack of polyamory in a lot of media tends to make people's expectations very low. We've talked about this in the past, and if you know anything about me, you know I'm never in lockstep with that, and my expectations tend to be grander. So let's make like old times and nitpick the few crumbs of polyrep we actually get. Here's 3 examples that jumped out at me that are all a little different. So, Nami's games stand out to me above anything else in this regard because they contain more than a few polyamorous relationships, but 2 in particular cover both the good and the bad. Polyamory is all over the Namiverse, with it being especially common among rabbits and virtually non-existent among wolves, and everything else is in between. This means that polyamorous relationships can range from casual to significant life decisions. This is good because oftentimes when people write polyamory, they just write their world as if it's completely normal everywhere, and it always ends up becoming super casual. And the problem I have with that is that when non-poly people write polyamory, it often comes off as sterile and soulless. It's hard to imagine the people involved sincerely love each other. I think it comes down to a lot of people's perception of polyamory being sleeping with all your attractive friends. Not helped by the fact that oftentimes straight people will attempt to use polyamory to prop up a failing marriage. So the Namiverse having to deal with polyamory as a concept is pretty good. I just wish that wasn't where it stopped. The relationship people think of in these games is Treat, Mochi, and Moxie. They have one really long-ass game that is almost entirely about the slow-developing romance between the 3 lead characters. And unfortunately, it's really not interesting. Lonely Wolf Treat is what I call the basic polyamory story. This is the story every non-poly person writes as their first story about polyamory. Treat runs away from home due to the fact that wolves are almost religiously monogamous, and she is poly, so the idea of a single partner bothers her. She's also quite self-loathing about it, with multiple instances of describing herself as disgusting or selfish. This is something she gets over as her relationship between Mochi and Moxie develops, and that's where the problem starts. The 3 of them really don't feel like they're in a relationship. They are that super relaxed, super casual, platonic plus kind of poly relationship. Part of that is because most of the story is all set up, with them only being in a relationship in Chapter 7. But even then, the lead-up tends to make the relationship feel thin on the ground. There's a big part in Chapter 7 where, in trying to make sense of Treat's polyamory, Candy suggests that one of them must be Treat's main partner, and Treat says it isn't like that. Except it is like that. Mochi is Treat's main partner. Mochi often has Treat blushing like crazy, she often can't speak properly around her, and there's no denying that Treat is in love with her. Conversely, there's no denying that Mochi is in love with Treat, even going as far as to make her a bracelet and specifically say that it's because she loves her so much. Mochi and Treat's relationship is the thing that Lonely Wolf Treat focuses on. Conversely, Moxie is a borderline third wheel. Treat often barely reacts to Moxie in any way, and Mochi has few interactions with Moxie that last longer than a few seconds. There is a definite hierarchy in this relationship, and Moxie is at the bottom. This isn't itself a problem, but it creates one. Within polyamory, there is hierarchical and non-hierarchical polyamory. Hierarchical polyamory is where, among the partners, there is a very clear favorite, but hierarchical polyamory is also unavoidable when a new partner comes into an established relationship. Relationships take time to build and develop, and when you've been with someone a long time, a new partner coming into that, unless they were already a close friend for a very long time, is going to be on unequal ground. That's just how linear time works. But give that enough time and that hierarchy falls away. This isn't itself a problem unless people deny that this is the case. Unhealthy polyamorous relationships often come about as a result of people denying this basic reality exists or rigidly enforcing it. And you can do interesting things with this narratively. If 2 people have an established relationship, you can laser focus on how they interact with the new partner, and this is really good for a novice. Unfortunately, that's not something Treat does. The story has to explicitly say that Treat is in love with Moxie because you wouldn't have assumed so otherwise. Their interactions throughout the game are extremely tepid, and even in subtle supplementary material, Treat still barely reacts to anything Moxie does. Lucky Number Moxie is actually about the way Treat's lack of reaction to her, often ignorant to the fact that she's flirting with her, is starting to mess with her head. Moxie already thinks poorly of herself, and Treat's only making it worse. She starts thinking she's intruding on her and Mochi's relationship. Where this becomes a problem is that it's not just her self-loathing, this is just how the relationship is written, and it doesn't get resolved because the writer is under the impression that this issue was not present. Treat and Mochi appear in Syrup 2, and their friendship going on relationship gets a lot of time, but Moxie gets a passing mention at best and a joke order alongside it. I'm often at a loss to explain what I'd like to see from PolyRep, but I know it's not this. But I have to make this clear, I'm not taking this game down a peg over this. This is not unique to Lonely Wolf Treat. This is the story that every non-poly writer makes as their first polyamory story. You could copy my criticisms to any book you can find at Indigo. And to prove I'm not turning on my favorite indie dev, let's get into the other one. Conversely, Nami has a poly relationship I really like, and that's Time, Space, and Nil. Firstly, unlike Treat, Mochi, and Moxie, this one's a V polycule. Nil and Space are with Time, but they are not with each other because they are effectively twins. Look, I don't want to be judgy, but if you and your sibling are dating the same person and you're happy that way, good for you. Don't let anyone tell you how to live. The thing is, Her Tears Were My Light has the same issue as Lonely Wolf Treat. Time barely ever remembers Nil and very clearly loves Space more, but unlike Treat, the game is purposefully about that. Time is actually kind of a shit partner, and the entire plot is about resolving that and making things right with Nil. Compared to Lonely Wolf Treat, where not only is this never resolved, but the story is just another story about how polyamory is valid. Time, Space, and Nil actually have a story about their relationship. Even later, after they become Time and Spice, Nil is ultimately left behind again, and when she manages to break into reality, she becomes almost obsessively controlling of Time. These three are not good at polyamory. Not in the slightest. They are terrible at this. But you never once get the feeling that they don't love each other dearly. They wouldn't keep desperately trying to make this work otherwise. And I like that way more. I like that they're just so utterly bad at this, but for reasons both beyond and within their control. You fully understand why they're like this, and you can't completely blame Time for having her memory erased. In many other cases, it's almost as if people are afraid of delegitimizing polyamory if they talk about how it can be a challenge. Not helped by the fact that if there's a breakup, people will take that as proof polyamory doesn't work. But Time, Space, and Nil are messy, and not in a terrible toxic femslash kind of way, but in a way that makes you cheer for them to get better at all of this. Oh, actually, shit, you know what they are? They're the mouse trying to get the cracker back into the mouse hole. How's he doing, by the way? Yes! Fucking yes! I'm so happy for this mouse! It's such a personal story. It's not trying to be an ambassador for polyamory's validity, because Nami already wrote that story, so it can just be about the genuine and sincere love that these three have for one another. They suck at this, but they're going to make it work if it kills them, and they just might. This speaks to me a lot more as a very personal and unique story. Ironically, both stories feature a de facto hierarchy, but while Her Tears Were My Light is explicitly about that, Lonely Wolf Treat operates under the impression that it isn't. I understand there's only so much time for a single game to tell the story it wants to tell, but between the two, I like Her Tears Were My Light a lot more. And this settles for me the kind of polyamory stories I want to see. Stories about unique and interesting relationships that all explore polyamory differently, to different levels of success and different levels of grace, where the love between the people involved is more important than serving as an informative pamphlet. There's a level of intimacy that gets strangely lost in a lot of polyamory stories. I often wonder if this is because a lot of these writers aren't poly, and so tend to unknowingly write them as being, to a degree, less special than monogamous relationships. Polyamory doesn't feature in a lot of fiction, but it's all over fandom, and so often polycules are written to be so bureaucratic. So the actual relationship between the characters suffers as a result, and it becomes far less interesting to read. Fandom does this thing I greatly dislike, wherein polyamory is used only as an antidote to a ship war or a love triangle, where people say, polyamory could fix this. And yeah, you know what else could? Proper communication. It rings a little too close to how RPG romance uses polyamory. I mean, realistically speaking, the likelihood of finding two people in an adventuring party you're romantically compatible with, who are then also okay with a multi-partner relationship, is astronomically low, so it's less about telling an interesting story than it is about indulging a harem fantasy. Never was this more apparent to me than with the Baldur's Gate 2 mod All Things Mazzy, which embodies everything I hate about the way people write polyamory, as well as a few other things I hate. Now, this mod, by and large, is fucking unhinged, and it already establishes itself as being made from the fiery penis of Lucifer himself in Irenicus' dungeon, but the component that features Mazzy is the strangest. Now, I don't have footage of all things Mazzy because I'm never putting myself through that again, so you'll have to make do with my little diagrams. Mazzy is written in the mod to be a very open person sexually, romantically, and emotionally. This is completely out of step with Mazzy's actual personality, which is a dry paladin wannabe who can't go 12 seconds without yelling about Avarine! I call this the Valera Sanguinar effect, where a boring character is made silly and self-consciously irreverent by the fandom for reasons that only make sense to someone with terminal brain damage. But it's the sort of character that a non-poly person would write as polyamorous, and now you can see where we're going with this. If for whatever reason you have downloaded Mazzy's mod just to then eschew sleeping with her, she's supposed to shift gears and turn her sights on Imoen, which I think is actually cute. I like mods that let me set someone else up with Imoen. Imoen's own mod has an entire route where you can set her up with Aerie, and it's the cutest shit ever written by mortal hand. However, partway through her relationship with Imoen, she and Imoen confront the ward about wanting to be poly together. Right there. Out of the fucking blue. First of all, at this point, you have already turned Mazzy down multiple times. So already this is pushy, and already Mazzy needs to get the fuck out of my party. Second of all, as a general rule of thumb for Baldur's Gate 2 modding, you can safely assume that if the player is okay with the idea of fucking Imoen, they would have already downloaded the mod that lets you do that. So if they haven't, and they're playing yours instead, it's probably gonna be super fucking weird to just suggest quasi-incestuous group sex out of the fucking blue. Mazzy, if you could even make this happen, you are going to be the moxie in that relationship. You can't compete with 15 years of friendship. Why am I on this tangent? What am I doing? Imoen's own mod treated Imoen's feelings for the ward as a serious emotional epiphany that takes 70% of the game to come to grips with. It's a serious subject with a lot of emotional nuance, but ACM just throws it on you out of the blue. You can't even do that with normal polyamory, let alone whatever eldritch nightmare this is turning into. The mod's approach to polyamory is very monogamous, ironically. Like, hey man, I'm open. It's no big deal. Just do whatever, man. No, it is a big deal. Realizing you love two people is a big emotional moment for someone. It's not something you just throw out there with all the casual disregard of a three-way, you fuck. Like, wipe away all the other unhinged crap, and what we have is someone proposing a polyamorous relationship to two people she's only recently met, who are both related, with all the casual aloofness of suggesting getting a cup of coffee. One of those people having already turned her down multiple times now. This approach to writing polyamory speaks to a level of unseriousness toward the subject that is quite frankly absurd, as if polyamorous relationships don't get to have the level of significance that monogamous relationships do. It seems like a lot of people can't comprehend the idea of a polyamorous group fully living together, buying a house, raising a kid, or even still being together into their middle age. At times, some people write polyamory when they really just want to write group sex or an open relationship. Romance stories in general are already hamstrung by the idea of the story ending when the couple gets together, but polyamory is quite literally hostile to the concept. Everyone is done a disservice by not considering the actual relationship part of the relationship. Okay, CD, well, if you wrote a polyamorous relationship, what would it be? Wait, you have to think about that? Have you never? So I take an established couple who have a third wheel, the friend they've always hung out with who's always been close to both of them. Over the course of the first act, since they've been around each other for so long, have the couple individually start getting flustered around them, having feelings they've never had this strongly before. Then they have to realize the other one is feeling the same way, cue awkward emotionally charged conversation, cue agonizing over what to do next, cue just going for it. That's what I do. Already you have an additional person in the relationship who doesn't need to overcome the gap in time spent together because they've already spent a ton of time together. There's already a closeness between them and it's just getting stronger. Also, you know how much I love my friends to lovers, it's the best thing ever, so of course I brought it in here. That's not to say I'd want every story to be like that, because the thing I'd want to see most from polyamory stories is variety. You can literally draw these polycules in any way you want, so you could come up with any kind of relationship dynamic and any number of people you want. 3 is the go-to for people because it's the ideal number of main characters to manage, but if you can make 6 work and make all of them interesting, then do 6. But you know what you shouldn't do? Absolutely should never, ever, ever do? Make 1 character and claim that 1 character is an entire polycule, Fluorite.